So we would like to talk about our directed but player-driven approach to cinematic storytelling in Cyberpunk. As we set out to tell emotional and gut-punching stories, and every decision we took in our design was actually to support that. We hope you will have amazing time with us, and in the end you will know how it all worked behind the scenes. My name is Kajetan Kapuściński. I'm a lead cinematic designer at CD Projekt Red.
Hi, I'm Paweł Ochocki. I'm a senior cinematic designer and coordinator at CD Projekt Red. Alongside with Kajetan, we worked on several projects together. So we worked on the base Witcher 3 project. We worked on both expansions, so Hearts of Stone and Blood and Wine. And we worked on Cyberpunk 2077, about which we would actually talk today. Before we go any deeper in the presentation, interactive scenes were a massive project inside our company. And because of that, a lot of areas and departments are involved in that. We would like to use this opportunity to actually thank them, thank the QA, thank the cinematic designers, thank the story writers, the quest designers, producers, programmers of all sorts. Honestly, it's hard to mention everyone, but we would like to say thank you and we love you.
So we think it's rather obvious, but this presentation will contain spoilers of Cyberpunk 2077, as well as some of The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. So be aware that if you stay with us, it might influence your future experience. Also, our games, we make major games, we touch some difficult subjects, so some of the scenes we will show might be disturbing to you, so just be aware of that. Talking about Witcher 3 and spoilers from Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, let's start presentation watching one scene from this game.
The old horse! Grab her!
Taken. You must put him in the oven. Trust me.
Take care not to hurt the child. Give me the feed.
In the oven. Throw him in the oven.
All right, and now let's watch another one, this time from Cyberpunk 2077.
Fine. Sure. Lord, through your divine wisdom and guidance, you bestow good fortune. I pray you do so this day, upon Joshua, upon me. Joshua?
This is it. My time has come. I want you to walk with me. I'd like you to wield the hammer. Nail me to the cross. Please.
All right, Joshua. I'll do it.
Thank you.
Let's do this. You're gonna have to say some lines. A few. We'll put them up on the prompter for you.
Messiah, save yourself and save us.
not fear God. You stand condemned under the same sentence.
So, those of you that played Witcher 3, could I see who actually did throw the baby into the oven? Okay, that's a lot. How you should. Who did crucify Joshua in Cyberpunk? Okay, I see there is some overlap. For us, it's important to ask those questions because those are the experiences and situations that player can actually go through in our games. I think there are just interesting moments and problems that we need to face when talking about this narration.
And we also chose those two scenes deliberately, as they clearly show the different approach we took in terms of cinematic design in Cyberpunk 2077. So in today's talk, we will cover some topics. First of all, what cinematic design is, and actually what our craft is, how we imagined players to become actors in the scenes of Cyberpunk, and how we build up a design narrative framework that allowed us to actually make those scenes.
Yeah, so to start with, what the hell is cinematic design? Honestly, it's pretty simple. We are the people responsible for designing, creating interactive content in our games. We are responsible for how it looks and also the timing, the pacing, the delivery of it. So we work on delivering scenes like in the first example. We work on that using visual scripting language based on notes, like in the second movie. Also, we work with actors on mock-up stage to deliver the performances that we later can use in our scenes that we want the players to actually experience. In the first example, so the one from The Witcher, you could see a pretty classic movie-like narration, movie-like structure. So we had cameras, we had edit, and everything that normal movies also have. However, in addition to all of that, we do have some interactivity. Interactivity presented in the form of choices that are presented to the player, whether they do throw the baby into the oven or not. Alongside with that, we actually can use some variables collected over the course of the whole game to branch the content deeper. What's important for us and worth mentioning during this presentation is that during those scenes, those very focused particular moments, the whole game world basically pauses. Nothing really is happening outside of the scenes. Those are very directed, very bespoke solutions and moments. So this is an example of one scene from The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. This actually is a stage play on which Kaitek here worked during that project. The majority of the nodes you can see here are what we call sections. Sections contain timeline. In those timelines, we actually have animations and other type of events that drive the performances of actors and things that we want to happen during those scenes. What's important to note here is that this whole experience is very directed. This whole experience is what we actually want players to experience, right? So we have choices that can branch the content. We have variables, but apart from that, nothing else happens during the scenes.
As for Cyberpunk, we knew from the get-go that we would like to push our discipline a little bit forward, and we would like to give players more opportunities to roleplay during scenes. Basically, to give them more ways to express themselves inside the cinematic content. So we would like to guide you through our process. First of all, we had to ask ourselves this question. It's an ancient question. We heard it many times, even on GDC. It's also a question that we ask ourselves when we play the games we love. So basically, what is more important, story or gameplay? Some people would say that gameplay is king, as the most important thing is to play the game, and everything else in the game, aesthetics, art, story, should be treated as servants towards the mechanics that allow players to experience it. So who here would agree with that? Oh, we have some. Okay. Pavel as well. Nice. So other people would claim that story is king, that the most important thing is the story and adventure experience that we want players to go through, and later on everything else should be treated as servants towards it. So mechanics, gameplay, and so on should be treated as something that builds up the story. And who here would agree with that statement? Okay. You probably noticed that Pavel raised hand 2 times, and actually that's something we were thinking about while in production of Cyberpunk, because For us, the answer is not that simple, because those are two really important aspects of the game. And even though we are cinematic designers, so we are really rooted in the story of the game and narration, we think that both areas should be treated as equally important, and we should find a way to make this cooperation real. And we decided that it's gonna be our task as designers to actually make it real. But saying that story and gameplay doesn't mean much yet for the game design. We have to ask ourselves how to give that to players, how we imagine players and their experience inside our content. That's why we asked ourselves another question. What is the player role in that experience? As we are cinematic designers by heart, we think of movie-like production roles. So first of all, we thought of movie director, a person who pushes and pulls strings and directs the spectacle that later on can be viewed by the people on the couch or in the cinema, right? We think of actors, people who invoke emotions internally, who experience the screenplay on their own, and later on, viewers can empathize with them. Viewers can relieve the emotions together with the actors. In the game like Witcher 3, we would say that players, like in terms of cinematics, players are more of the directors. They choose some options from time to time to see how the spectacle, how the show will unfold when they make that decision. However, for Cyberpunk, we decided that we would like to turn a little bit and give the players the role of actors, of people who are there in the front seat and can experience everything that's happening and perform on a stage that we prepare for them.
So again, this is something extremely simple on the surface, right? But however, how do we actually do that? How do we make players and actors inside those scenes? For sure, one part of it, that is immersion. Immersion is this big, gigantic word, but for us, it basically means we can have the product, the scenes being very immersive if we actually allow the player to take part in them, if we can actually engage them on a very basic level. For us, this is something crucial. That's at the heart of the design. The ability to actually influence the scenes, to be an actor inside those scenes. For us, it also, if we do our job well, it will also reduce the very natural friction between the narration part of the game and the gameplay part of the game. Again, this is important if we want to deliver the experience that we want to deliver. However, we quickly discovered that it's, well, if you have very immersive qualities in your product, and in this case, inside scenes, well, amazing scenes get only better because of the immersion, right? However, some parts of the scenes, so the imperfections that you would normally hide under the camera cuts or editing would basically stick out because, well, immersion multiplies everything. And in this case, we had to always keep in mind that there is a good content, there is worse content, and we need to actually be very wary of both. Another part of our approach to making players and actors in the scene is what we call the diegetic narration. So the part about if we actually deliver this kind of freedom, this kind of engagement inside the scenes to the players, well, they need to understand the rules of the game. They need to understand that every limitation that actually is put on them during those scenes is understandable. That the justification for the limitation, the constraints is actually understandable, and they know what's happening to their characters, to their actors inside those scenes. Players should be controlled at all times. I wanted to read this sentence because this is extremely important and, again, at heart of our design. Third thing that we knew we had to basically abandon from Witcher was the post-world concept. So whenever a scene was actually happening, we no longer could basically say, okay, nothing else happens beside the scenes. No, in order to actually to actually give the player ability to influence those scenes and be able to do actions during those scenes, whether by narrative-driven actions or by gameplay, we needed to basically say, okay, every scene is real-time from now on. So in this example, you can see that we are actually in the middle of conversation with Jackie. However, in the background, the world simply flows. The world simply happens. Maybe there is a scene happening right next to us, and nothing actually is separating us from the content, the narration from the gameplay in this specific example.
So we had to think about what acting really is. And we came to our experiences from mock-up stage. So basically, one of the rules that we use while working with actors is acting is doing. So it's not enough if actor is just sat on the screen. Actor has to burst into tears to show that to the viewers. And having that in mind, we knew that we need to boost interactivity of our scenes, to give players more action verbs inside those scenes to be able to perform. And first action verb, the one that we know well from our previous titles, is ability to talk. So basically, being able to speak up to other characters, being able to choose what your character will say exactly, and sometimes even choosing to which character we want to speak. We have two types of options in our choice hubs in the game. You can see that in the upper example. Blue ones are fluffs. Those are the ones that give you more context of the world, of the NPCs, and can lead you to additional content if you want to invest into that. Yellow ones are emphasis. Those are the ones that you can pick only once, and when you do it, the story will unfold in new direction. What is new for us in Cyberpunk, and that is something you can see in the second example, is that we used silence as an action verb for players as well. We never did that before, but in this example you can see that there's a situation in which if player don't speak up to Claire in this example, she will kill Samson there because we didn't take any action on that.
So another action verb that we wanted to actually use in a narrative sense to give and use as an expression vector for the player was the ability to move, something extremely basic when you think about it, right? So in Witcher 3, we were basically limiting ourselves to only the talk action, to picking stuff from the UI. Here we actually want to use very natural elements of gameplay, in this case, movement. On the top example, you can see that the player moved too close to another character and they pushed them away. This was important for us, this action and reaction type of thing. On the other hand, we could also see that, for example, in the second example, basically player was being told, do not take one step towards me, or I will kill myself. And the character did exactly that. So the ability to actually interpret the distance towards something, the ability to interpret it if player character is actually somewhere in an area, either they entered it or actually left it. For us, it was extremely useful as a narrative tool. So the player position in general was something we could interpret in a narrative sense.
And another simple action verb that we can interpret, it's ability to look around. It's there in every game possible, but we used it in our cinematic design to actually drive the scenes forward. And we were able to check whether players look at something or maybe not look at it, for how long do they look at it, if it's in their screen space and so on. You can see that in this example, that there is a scene in which shopkeeper asks player to look into the camera. And that's something we didn't do previously, but at this time we just use this action verb, so player has to look into the camera so it can perform some scanning, and that will let the story progress forward.
Another action verb that we would like to use is the ability to act. By act, I mean do some narrative action that's actually custom. So in this example, we were betrayed by Placide. We walk up to him. We are presented with an option to punch him, and we do exactly that. For us, it was important because it gave us the ability to have those custom interactions that are meaningful in the narrative sense, right? So for example, here we can punch someone, but what if you could actually lean towards someone and kiss them, or simply hug them? Those are all important narrative actions that we can simply take and use. We used the UI we actually were already using for the dialogue choices. However, we expanded it by action tags and icons. By action tags, I mean quick descriptions that tell you what will exactly happen to the player when that option is actually picked. For us, it was extremely, again, important to make all things happening to the player character understandable on every level. So being very explicit about the consequences of the actions was for us very important. Another part of this is this gigantic container of things that we actually can do. So action verb do. This is a container for all the gameplay stuff. So whether it's shooting, driving, or jumping, we can use this narratively as an expression vector for the player. And we can actually interpret their actions as something we can use inside the scenes. Here we can see that a player is being asked to basically say, what will happen with Adam Smasher, game boss. We could do this on a cutscene of some sort. However, for us, it was important to have this personal moment be left to the player. So they can simply walk away and do nothing and leave him in this state, or they can simply shoot him right there. And we also will support this on the narrative side.
And now we can watch a short scene that kind of shows how it all works in motion. It's one of the examples. You can see that basically in every scene in Cyberpunk. There's those different action verbs.
That's fine. Step aside.
What? Got any idea what to do?
I'm gonna bypass the coupling and rig a hot wire.
Compressor will run on and on. It could seize up.
Did anyone ask your opinion? Okay, let's see what happens.
It's like I was telling you. Not shabby at all. Question's how long it'll last you.
It'll get me to Night City. I'll figure something else out there.
Right.
So we know that acting is doing, but acting is also reacting. That's also a rule for us while we work with actors on mock-up stage. So whenever actors perform some action, they can expect other actors to react to it. And that creates that beautiful tension, and usually the best performances comes out of it. That's why in our cinematic design, we wanted to not only have interactivity, which we use this term for the explicit action that we show to the player as an option to move forward, but we also wanted to have some reactivity. So basically recognize what player is doing and maybe do something with it. And to show you one example, there's a scene in which player can wrap up conversation with Kirk, the guy sitting by the table. However, if at this exact moment, player will look to the side, to the Big Joe, who were just sitting there but stood up to make a way for the player, this big fella will play a rushing animation with his gun just to rush the player to stand up. And even more, player will be then able to react to that with some mocking line for the Big Joe. So it's a situation in which we try to acknowledge action verbs that player uses in the scene, and we try to promote it with some inward encouragements, let's say. So, for example, here you could feel the tension between you and Big Joe from the start of the scene, and if you follow that tension, then you might get some reward. And the reward is the last word. So we give some animation or maybe line to pick from as a reward for players who explore. However, we feel that we only scratch the surface of this topic, and we found that it's really good to build up even more of a feeling of being there as an actor when NPCs and world react to your actions, which are not exactly the main path.
So the next part we would like to talk about is, well, everything we talked about up until this point could be potentially used in a third-person perspective game. It would simply work. However, we decided on first-person perspective, and with that comes unique challenges and opportunities that we can actually use and we need to think about. So no cutscenes. In Cyberpunk 2077, we basically have no cutscenes. It was an artistic decision made by us after E318. We basically took a look at the game's story. So the story about V, a mercenary in a city of dark future. It's also about story. It's also a story about V because she is dying. Two personalities clash in her head, and we as a player need to decide what will actually happen to them. For us, it was extremely intimate, personal story, and we simply felt that this particular viewpoint, so point of view of the player itself, is the right one to pick for this specific story. That does not mean we actually don't have cuts during the game, because we use in-frame cuts, we use in-frame editing, we use montages. The only exception to this rule are game endings. We basically wanted to present to the player their fully realized character, because they went through a story, and at the very end of it, they can take a look at their character and say, oh, like, this is me, those are my choices, and I understand how did I actually got here. For us, it was an obvious choice when it comes to first person, and cutscenes at the end we feel just fit perfectly.
big aspect of first-person perspective games is body presence. And in our game, we decided that body will be present at all times. So whenever players look down with their camera, they will see their torso and legs. We could use that narratively as well, because we could prepare a lot of custom poses in scenes and show players another layer of emotions and tension and intention of us as artists in the scene itself. Besides poses, we played with the idea of player gestures. So whenever player speaks up, we sometimes play the gesture on top of that. You can see that in the lower example with Takamura in Diner. We had mixed result with that, actually, but we found out that it worked best when it's triggered just after the intention, just after picking the option, so player feels it's a connection between player, and the player character in the scene. Sorry, I skipped one. Okay. So on top of poses and gestures, we added something, let's say subtle, but really important to us. So we have a camera parallax. So basically, whenever players look around with their camera, it doesn't only rotate as a fixed point in a space, but it actually moves on a custom curve to imitate the feeling of moving your head around. So thanks to that, we have this cool effect of different objects on different planes in frame, changing relative positions. And thanks to that, it all feels more grounded in the scene. We also play breathing animations on top of the character, so you can feel your body is alive. And we can use that narratively as well. Whenever V is sick or tired, we can boost the animation to give more of a feeling of emotion and tension to the players. And our character is fully voiced. That's not an obvious choice if you think about FPP games, but we strived for the biggest immersion and story-driven game in a way, and we thought that's an obvious choice for us. We also played with the sounds, so we want it to be audible as it would be with your own ears when you are there in a scene with your body. The last thing are mirrors, and that's really important for us because we know character and style is important for Cyberpunks, especially that we have character customization and lots of really amazing clothes. And we wanted to have some scenes in which we can build up the connection between player and playable character. Even though we decided not to do cutscenes, we wanted to show this, so we even started game with every start of the game is basically seen with the mirror.
Another part of play as an actor and first-person perspective opportunities and challenges is framing, because like Kajtek said, framing comes from player's body. It's something that we basically take as a granted. We can't move the camera on its own, right? In a way, gamers in this case are more cinematographers than we are, because they decide on the frame that's presented. We quickly noticed that the framing of the shots is actually very centric, so we use that consciously, because players wanted to actually see the characters in the center of their screens. So this is something we actually have to take into account during our work. Another part of that is that we had limited opportunities to actually tweak the shots. We did that, but it was always subtle. So basically, we tweaked a tiny bit the field of view or the depth of field itself to actually focus the experience that we wanted to present on a very particular part of the image. However, again, that was subtle and used only the transition between states for the player character. We could actually take control over where the player was looking, so over the camera. However, because we wanted the player to actually feel in control at all times, and everything that actually limited that should be justified in the world, we used player lookouts, so taking over the control very sparingly and only in most extreme examples where we had to do that.
With action verb of moving, we actually gave player control over where they stand. So we had to change our approach to the staging for the player. So we had to prepare it not for where player is, but where player might be in the scene in the end. That's why we ended up with something we think closer to theater stage than anything. And player is another actor on this stage. We thought of this idea of sweet spots. Those are vantage points from which scenes look the best. And we used every trick in the book to actually invite players to be there. And you can see that on the examples provided. We used lights and shadows, as we know that players are naturally driven to come to the well-lit places. We used level design and environment. So, as in the top example, you just have to move around between the furniture to see the scene and be engaged in it as an actor. We used staging of other NPCs. As in the second example, you can see Hanako is standing up from the piano and turning towards player. And usually that was enough for the player to feel invited and come to her to talk. We also, whenever we really needed to know where player is, we placed some interactions in the scene, as we could steer the range of interaction and angle from which that interaction is actually available to the players. And those are the moments where we could grab the control, but we waited for the player intent to actually do that, right? At first, we were really worried that that's not going to be enough and players will end up jumping around, looking for bugs in the corners of the room and so on. However, it turned out pretty quickly that gamers just want to have the best experience possible. So most recordings we watch, we see players participating in scenes in a way really close to the one imagined by us, and we only left some clues for them.
When it comes to acting, so the animations that we use in a game, well, no longer we could basically hide things under camera and editing. Animations had to look really good from every possible angle because we had a lot of unknowns where the player is looking or where they are actually standing. This also influenced our mock-up approach because we had to take into account much more than ever before the environment in which the locations, the scenes were actually happening. So no longer we could simply play and record animation in some kind of abstract space. No, we actually had to use the locations that we ended up using inside the game. As you can imagine, this was a big change. However, we felt it was for the better of the whole.
And also, we didn't know from which angle player will see the animation, right? So we also had to change that because in the previous project, we could just act out for the camera shot. Here, it was just not possible.
Yeah. So we would like to show you another short sample of the scene, of an intimate scene that we think uses first-person perspective particularly well, using sound and closeness of the characters and the ability to be actually very, very intimate with the whole experience.
But that's never stopped you from taking action, going where you needed to go. And it won't stop you now.
How do I keep up with everything that's changing?
You have been keeping up. You've made an impact.
Got some new hardware.
Not a single thing in this world isn't in the process of becoming something else. Likewise, you never look back. If you gotta kill, kill. If you gotta burn it all to the ground, then let it burn.
Afterlife.
Oh, what's going on? Goddamn thing threw me out.
Need to talk to you.
Talk? You pulled the emergency brake, ripped me out just to talk? What happened? I do something wrong?
So now we would like to guide you through the framework we created for ourselves to actually be able to do that. It was a question of like how to scale the complexity of our game, of our cinematic design. We had to think of how to overcome our challenges, so providing a lot of action verbs to the players, having it all done in first-person perspective with real-time scenes and so on. And we had to find a way to blend between full gameplay and full cutscenes in our design. For us, we also needed it both as a design need, so to create a building blocks from which designers will be able to create those experiences, but also as a production tool, because it allowed us to check what's going on actually, but we'll go into that in a second. Now, don't be scared. It's a huge slide. There's a lot of info here, but we'll go through each one separately. So that framework, we called it tiers of engagement. And for us, those are building blocks from which we build every scene in the game. And those limit how much control a player has, how much action verbs are like actually available for the players, and how we want to guide them through the whole process. Some of them are first-person perspective, actually most of them. Some of them are interactive and some are non-interactive. And we will go through them to show you how it works in the game.
So when you think about it, tiers of engagement and an answer from our side to the problem of signal and noise, right? If you have a design with so many unknowns, where the player is, what they are doing, where they are looking, we need to actually take a very conscious decision on what's important inside the scene, the signal part of the scene. This is the focused thing that we want to tell the player. This is the story part. Those are the important, crucial elements that we want them to experience. However, on the other end of the spectrum, there's the noise. This is the agency of the player, everything that they can do and they can enjoy on their own. We simply believe that both of those are valuable, and the interaction between them, the friction between them, is where the actual interesting moments for the player happen and where we can use in a narrative sense. To start with, there's a first tier, so tier 1, full gameplay. As we can see here on the example, well, we are being invited to the scene. However, nothing is stopping us to simply go away or shoot people around. This is full gameplay, so we have full control over the camera, the movement, the abilities of the player. We can use this to deliver some simple choices and simple story content. However, it's still important to have that in the game, because this is actually what gives the player the ownership over their own experience.
Second tier, we call it staged gameplay, and that's the moment when we introduce first limitations to the players. So, for example, we slow down moveset or alter it. You can see that in the videos on the screen. So, for example, in the first one, when player approaches Jackie for the first time to meet, the movement is slowed down and some abilities are turned off, so player can actually be involved in this situation without more of confusion and ability, like things to do. Second example is interesting though. It doesn't work, or it doesn't play. Did it play or not at all? Oh, sorry for that. Oh, maybe now. Yeah, it plays. Cool. So second one is interesting because we provide those limitations with some context in world. So there is a sandstorm and player runs through this sandstorm, and that's why those limitations are applied. That's why movement is slowed down and locomotion is altered. For us, it was important to always have the fixed time, situation, or space for this tier to appear, because thanks to that, player can understand why those limitations, even though not really big at this stage, but still feeling limiting, appear. So players can understand the context of it, and the best situation is when the will of designer to make players participate in a scene in some way is aligned with the player's will and player's agency at this moment. So that was our task when introducing any limitations.
As you can imagine, it's easy to actually go overboard with limitations because of the natural need to actually tell a story. So it's easy to go overboard, and we need to take very, very conscious control over when we actually apply those limitations. The third tier, which is displayed here, we are actually being held down by the police on the ground. For us, it's an extremely powerful tool to tell very powerful emotional moments in the game. Basically, here we can push the acting of our characters. Here we know where the player is, and we have control over the angles that they can actually perceive the situation from. Here, the choices can actually be very, very, very involving. Right? Here we can play around with the position of the actors in scene, knowing fully where everything is. However, what's important is that we can't, again, overdo it. It's very easy to turn game into a sitting simulator because we want to tell the story. However, we know that, and we needed to avoid that during the game to actually deliver the full breadth of the experience that we want the players to experience.
Fourth tier is FPP cutscene. So those are the moments where a playable character is moving and camera follows it. Those are the moments where we'll have full control over what players see and witness on the screen, basically. However, we had two really important rules for those. First is like what Pavel already is describing, so it has to come out of the context. So in majority, we used tier 4 after interactions, so player gave us intention to actually participate in that animation. In some others, like we used external context, but it has to be understandable, like grenade exploding next to you and your body is thrown away. That is something we also consider a good design at this stage. Thanks to this control over the, second rule, I missed that almost. So second rule, and it's really important as well, is that we want those to be short. So we don't want to have long FPP cutscenes because we feel it's really limiting. That's why we decided that we have like short scenes which have 1, 2, sometimes 3 beats inside, several seconds long tops. And thanks to that control, we also can tell really emotional stories, like in the examples provided. First one is jumping down from Arasaka Tower, and it's a spectacle for the player. The other one is intimate and can tell a lot of emotions, kissing character you love.
Then there's the final 5th tier full cutscene, FPP cutscene. Here we actually take the camera out of player body and we use objective camera to tell very, very particular story that we want to tell. So we have full control over the experience of the player. They don't have any kind of interactivity available to them. We use those, again, only for outros, so the game endings in this case. We felt it was, again, powerful tool, but we needed to use it when it did fit. For us, it was game endings. Right now, we would like to go over a short movie. I will basically narrate the movie and describe when the change of tiers actually happen. And you will probably see how densely we actually pack those things into the experience. So we start with the 2nd tier. Again, we have a player has full control over their movement. However, some abilities like shooting can
Let's
be
do
disabled.
this.
They go and actually enter the ice tube using tier 4, so first-person perspective animation. They are in tier 3 because they are sitting down. The body is limited to only rotational capability. Something happened to the player, but they understood why, because someone actually did help their head, so we understand what's happening.
Johnny?
Player can ask a question when this is happening, so we have some limited capability of interactivity and expression given towards player to be used to actually tell the story. Again, player is being transported into cyberspace in a cold water, so the hands I raised in response to that, it's, I hope, understandable to the player why. Here we are again in cyberspace. This is a special place in Cyberpunk world, and we are in a limited stage gameplay where basically no abilities are available except very few, such as movement or looking around. This is again used to deliver story in a very particular way.
This is our BBS, Data Fortress.
As you can see, we created this narrative grammar that's basically spread throughout the whole experience. Like in Witcher 3, all scenes are custom made, so we're able to simply go and divide every second of player experience into those tiers, which we think were a very powerful tool. For us, they were required at the very beginning of the production. So, like 4 years before your product actually ships, we knew we had to actually do our job well to design and direct the experiences well. Tiers also allowed us to do some cost and time prediction because the cost was asymmetric. Maybe a simple tier 4, so first-person perspective animation, was actually cheap for us designers. However, for animators, they could be expensive. On the other hand, maybe something that was cheap for the animators were actually expensive for us. For example, the tier 2 scene with advanced staging and multiple characters were simply time-consuming to do. However, they were, again, very powerful tools. This design in the tiers were giving us unique capabilities, unique challenges and perspective for problems that we had to actually address during this design. And for me, what's most important is that they gave this subconscious layer of understandable grammar towards the whole experience. We simply hope that player will actually learn how things work in this experience. If they click something will happen. There are no things that simply jump out of them. For us, this understandability of design and tiers was extremely crucial, even if it was hidden from the player's eyes.
And to give you some overview, it's a simplification, so don't treat it too seriously, but it shows the point. So in a game like Witcher 3, we had big chunks of gameplay and interactive scenes, sometimes cutscenes in which player has no control at all, interlaced throughout the experience. However, in Cyberpunk, the structure of narrative is much more fragmented and organic, so we changed tiers a lot. As you saw in the example, like Paweł narrated, you can have several changes throughout like 1 minute of the scene, right? So it changes how much control you as a player have during that experience. And Thanks to that, we believe it might become invisible to the player. So the same way the best movie edits are, like you don't think about the edit, you just get the story, you can live through the story. And thanks to that grammar and thanks to that organic structure, we believe that our narrative language also becomes invisible and helps player to have this seamless experience. And now, to show you a graph, this time from Cyberpunk. That's a scene graph, actually that's a scene Paweł worked on. It's a Mikoshi scene in which player decides on the fate of the body of V and what will happen next. Again, there are those small dark red nodes there, and those are the sections. The same ones Paweł described in the, like talking about Witcher graph. Those contain directed content, animations, and so on. All the rest of this colorful reef, I would say, are the logic nodes, which allowed us to introduce action verbs, which allowed us to give interactivity and reactivity to the scene. So compare both. Amount of logic, because those are both like one of the biggest scenes in games, right? So amount of logic we as cinematic designers had to design, borrow from quest designers and learn from them and implement in our cinematic structure is staggering. But we feel those are beautiful starships and we really like them. And as a sum up, just think of the two scenes we showed you at the start of this presentation, one from The Witcher and the other from Cyberpunk. We use different means for those experiences, right? Both are difficult for players, both are engaging, but are told in different way. And that's exactly the point. It's not about one being better than the other. It's just different toolset. And we chose the best toolsets for the stories we were telling to actually make the connection between gameplay and story possible. So whenever you work on something, just make conscious decisions what toolset you would like to use.
So we would like to finish this up with a few takeaways about the whole design and our thoughts when it comes to the game production. First of all, first-person perspective does not automatically mean immersive experience. We simply think that you have to work for the good kind of immersive experience. And for us, it took a while and it took a lot of effort. However, it's not obvious. However, you can get there if you actually spend enough time on the design stage of the whole experience.
What Paweł said early in the presentation, immersion is a double-edged sword. So whenever you strive for the biggest immersion possible, you have to think of the core of the game or scenes you are working on, because imperfections will be multiplied by the fact that players feel that they are there in the experience.
Another one is that our structure, this organic structure and predictability of it, so player understanding of the rules of the game makes all the stitching invisible. Even though we switch tiers again and again in a particular scene, even in 10 seconds of the scene, it's all invisible if it's done well and if player understand why it actually happened. We feel this is extremely important, this layer of understanding of both player side and design side.
You can have the best ideas possible, but without proper plan for it and framing for it, it will all fall apart. And it's important when you're artist or designer to frame it, to give yourself some constraints, but because that will help you with scaling. That will help you to keep the consistent and cohesive experience throughout the whole product you are working on. For us, it was tiers of engagement.
Well, first-person perspective is simply difficult. It's difficult on every possible level. It's difficult on the design stage, on the actually production stage, where you have to design and produce the tools to implement it, on the implementation stage. So I don't think it's simply possible to go into this kind of a design and say, okay, we are doing this because it's cheap. It's not cheap. It's not easy. It's actually difficult and complicated. However, the difficult road is actually the one often like the pleasant one, the interesting one. So we think it was a good choice.
And lastly, what we started with, there is that friction between gameplay and story, and they work best together. However, stating that you want them to work together is not enough. You have to find your idea and decision, like what it means to you and what it will mean to your players. For us, it was the decision that we want players to become actors in the scenes. And to finish this talk, we would like to show you one scene in which we feel that we really succeeded and players became actors in it. Basically, we are on a stage, we perform as a rock stars, basically, and take a look at what happens with camera, because it's not animation, it's not something we added there and we didn't even think about it. Players on YouTube start headbanging on their own as they think that being there as a rock star is what they should do. So walk around the stage and perform live, let's enjoy it for a minute.
I actually saw a few people nodding their head to the music, so I think we actually succeeded. And with that, we would like to thank you for being here with us on this presentation. I was Paweł Ochocki. I am Paweł Ochocki.
Yeah, you are. I'm Kajetan Kapuściński, and using this opportunity, I would like to invite you to join us as we are hiring for our both franchises, and we are really looking for some designers, and maybe that got you interested and you would like to participate in that.
It seems that we still have a few minutes for Q&A. Somehow we are actually very surprised. Thank you, sir. However, after that, we would love to actually talk to you more in the wrap-up room. So let's proceed with the Q&A.
Thank you very much.
I have two questions. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for pushing narrative along in games. I felt like playing Cyberpunk that I was seeing an evolution finally after many, many years of AAA narrative.
Thanks for that.
My two questions for you is, how did you balance, first one is, how did you balance V as a character versus player as a character? Like, how much personality did you give V versus how much did you let the player bring?
Okay, I think that's the question is how much of personality of V is shaped up by us as artists, and how much is shaped by a player, right? I think it would be better to give this question to story writers and quest designers at this stage, probably. Yeah, but if you want to tell a story that has some depth and so on, you have to do some constraints. It's the same for me as with tiers of engagement, let's say. So there are some constraints, but within those constraints, we give player a lot of possibilities to shape up the character and choose their own path. So I think that's the best I can give at this stage. Yeah.
I'll ask a question that's more in line then, which is how did you handle walk away with agency, where players could walk away or walk back in the middle of conversations?
So do we do that or?
Yeah, I know you do it in some places. I was just curious how you thought about it. When
how we got it.
Oh, well, like agency and player freedom, again, was very important for us, right? So we felt that whenever possible, whenever we knew that the noise is actually pretty high and we can allow the player to simply walk away and maybe come back, we should do that, right? So it's a matter of balance for sure. So some situations we simply can't allow this to happen because we want the signal to be extremely high quality and extremely, high in general. However, others where we can actually allow the player to simply have the agency back and actually approach the situation how do they want to. For example, the situation with Smasher that I designed, this was an example of where I think we could balance both, right? Because we are in a closed space, we could basically walk away from the situation, or we can engage in the situation and maybe finish Smasher and kill him.
I guess the question about it too is, when the player walked away, what did you do with that leftover node or thing that was sitting there?
If they just went elsewhere. So in some situations that would mean that player doesn't want to be involved in this exact scene, for example, and that will mean narratively. So sometimes we just close it, right? However, when we want players to come back, we keep the signal of the story alive at all times, and we we did it actually. We have some additional animations and lines for the NPCs waiting for the player. And when we approach them, sometimes we also have additional lines saying like, okay, you came back and so on. Like, does it answer this question or?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, cool.
So if I mean, basically it was a systemic but directed experience and solution for us, right? So we had a system in place. We could actually plug into the system and play the animations and responses from the characters. However, we also made some completely custom solutions on our own because our visual scripting language is extremely powerful. So we're able to do a lot of stuff that was very precisely handmade for that particular situation.
Thank you.
I think that one more interesting thing. Sorry, that's a good question. We also had some lines we called interrupts and like comeback lines. So whenever you left during a line, NPC would acknowledge that and say something about it, like, yeah, let's come back to this later. And when you come back, it's brought up. So we had system for that.
And it would just like resume the node it was on after the interrupt line.
So we pause the signal and then we revive it, but we have to take into consideration different states of different things. So for example, we won't start in the middle of animation, right? We have to start it from the start, basically.
Thank you.
Cool.
So
yes, maybe let's do this feature. Yeah.
I also have 2 questions. The first one is, have you thought about allowing players to express their own individuality by being consistently able to use those action verbs that you provided? And like, for example, walking closer to punch or walking closer to kiss, where sometimes, that might not make sense in context, but being allowed to do that sort of gives the player the freedom to sort of express themselves as a character the way they want.
Okay, so basically you're asking, did we think about allowing the action verbs to be useful in every situation in the game, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, certainly it's a tempting idea, right? But if you think about the scale of the potential problems that you would have, because honestly, this for me, this sounds like this kind of intimate, immersive sim on an extremely small scale being spread out throughout the whole game, which is an idea that I love. However, in this case, we simply had to think, okay, this is the story that we want to tell, and for some situations, this simply does not fit, right? It was not this kind of a sandbox story experience. It was still very narratively driven game for us.
Yeah, and although we started with that, we wanted to have that all the time, but we pulled back from it as we found our way of like this half-directed, half-free approach more suitable this time.
And then the follow-up question is, because there isn't that consistency, how do you let the player know that they can do those actions in those cases?
Yeah, so see, that's something we think we could have done better probably, because, for example, this scene which we shown with Big Joe, like standing up and then you can look at him and so on, that's something that's really hidden, and I think that's something we could learn from it, that it should have been more, I don't know how to say that. Explicit probably, or maybe we could teach players at the start of the game betterly of that, yeah. So I think that sums it up, right?
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, great talk. I had a question about how you directed this. So there aren't a lot of first-person films that you could have used as a reference, and so you're kind of creating this whole visual language. What were your iteration cycles like? Did you storyboard and then block it out, or did you just sort of sit down in a scene and see what worked?
So it all, again, tiers of engagement were really useful in that matter, because like we could have different because I need to repeat the question. So question is how we actually did it, right? What was our process to direct this FPP experience? So for example, for tier 5, it was easy to storyboard it, right? Because it's a cutscene. So we could use a pipeline well known for us from previous titles. For the rest though, we first think of the, let's say, main paths, and we try to visualize them. So there is, you can say storyboarding, because we storyboard different bits of the scene to understand how it will look like in the end. We did some top-down views with some animated, let's say, paths, how player can perceive the scene in the end. And it was different when we had a tier 3 scene where we knew almost perfectly what player will see, and it was different for like scenes in which player was able to move around. So It was a learning process. We had to try out a lot of stuff, and in the end, we found it's a mix of, let's say, movie-like production and game design, I would say. So prototypes mixed with storyboards. So we did a ping pong on that.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, do we have time for one more or not?
I think we...
One more, okay.
One more.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for the talk. It was amazing. This is kind of a two-parter. So obviously you have scenes that have many different beats to them. How often did you find yourself swapping between tiers or like A/B testing between tiers to figure out which ones were the right feeling that you want to give to the player? And then to that, how easy was it to adjust your node system? Because I saw like for that Makoshi scene, that was a Cthulhu-looking mess. But at the same time, like how easy was it to adjust when you were iterating on that scene and trying to get it to that point?
I can start with the second one. I mean, I'm not a programmer, so maybe expanding on the scene system is like the programming side is not my forte. However, I was a designer on that. It was difficult for sure because the amount of complexity to actually go into, right, and the amount of improvements that you have to do onto the whole editor itself to actually support, for example, previewing of those different scenarios of player behavior. In our case, for example, it was extremely important to have like an interactive preview inside the editor, so actually being able to play the game, being able to play the branch, or even maybe pre-bake the branch so we actually know and can save somehow the state of the nodes so we can actually follow them through, right? I hope that answers your question. So it was difficult for sure, and I love the Cthulhu name for my Mikoshi scene. Thank you.
Okay, and the first question was about when to use which tier, right? Like how do we approach this? Sorry, like if you could rephrase the first one.
Or like how often did you find yourself iterating or like switching out between tiers to test them out?
So, I would say like, game dev is a iterative process. So like there was numerous times when we had some idea for the scene, we did some storyboards, prototypes, and it turned out it's not the thing we want to have. So there was this all constant pushing between like freedom of player and directed narrative, right? And that is something we played around, and tiers was a mean to be able to switch between those. So there were situations when we thought of a scene that it's gonna be tier 2, for example, player will be able to move around, but then we found out that information given by us can be just missed, and we don't want them to be missed at this point. And the other way around as well, that we feel, okay, this is really limiting, that's tiresome for players. So maybe we could switch to some freedom and give them opportunity, like more of an agency in the scene.
Honestly, it was very exciting to actually give this opportunity for the players to express themselves by any means necessary, right? So, for example, killing Smasher, I love that we're able to actually deliver this on full gameplay. And the decision when it comes to the narration of it, so whether you leave him there or simply kill him on the spot, like, I love that we're able to simply do this fully on gameplay and say, okay, this is your game, this is your experience, do as you want it to.
So I think we're finished.
Yes, I'm sorry, we are out of time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.